In the world of mountaineering, the death zone refers to altitudes above 8,000 metres. At such heights, low oxygen levels and extreme weather pose severe risk to climbers. Just 14 mountains, all in the Himalayas, stand above 8,000 metres, and few have conquered them all. I'm Patrick Evenden, and on this episode of the Workday podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Adriana Brownlee. At the age of 20, Adriana achieved her childhood ambition of climbing Everest. 4 years later, she's climbed 13 of the world's 14 highest mountains and could become the youngest woman to climb them all when she takes on Shisha Pangma later this month. We're going to be talking about reaching the roof of the world, what keeps climbers coming back to the world's most dangerous summits, misconceptions about Gen Z, and what business leaders can expect from the next generation entering the workforce. Adriana, great to have you on the show. I guess it would be good to start with that record attempt. Tell us what you've achieved so far and what you've got coming up in the next few weeks.
So the record attempt was to become the youngest woman ever to climb the 14 and the first British woman as well. But from the moment that I found this dream, this ambition, until now, there's been a lot of changes in the 8,000 meter peak industry and world. And my perceptions have changed a little bit. And so now it's not really about the record anymore, but more about the achievement and the journey there. And so I'll still continue this project and I'll go to Shisha Pangma this month, actually, in April. And hopefully I'll complete my 14 Peaks project. And I will achieve the record, but most importantly, I'll achieve pride and I'll have that sense of, I've completed my goal and I have something to inspire other people with. I'm going to put you on the spot now. Can you name, off the top of your head, I imagine you can, I imagine it's easy for someone like you. Can you name the 14 or the 13 that you've already climbed? Yes, I can. So I've done Everest, Lhotse, Manaslu, Makalu, Dhaulagiri, Kanchenjunga, Annapurna, K2, Broad Peak, Nanga Parbat, Gasherbrum 1, Gasherbrum 2, Choyu. I think that's all of them. And which of those was the most challenging? The most challenging was probably Nanga Parbat, technically, because it's just a whole different league of its own, Nanga Parbat. So it's in Pakistan. It's the 9th highest mountain in the world. And it's got a section called the King Shofar Wall. And it's pretty much just a vertical rock wall at 6,500 meters, just before Camp 2. And there's no holds, there's nowhere to put your feet or your hands, but you do have a fixed line. And so you've got a 20-kilo backpack on, which is very heavy at the altitude. And you've got your ginormous 8,000 meter boots on, your crampons, you've got, so many things to think about. And then you've just got this vertical wall and you just look at it, it's 200 meters high. And you think, how the hell am I going to tackle this? And there's a lot of pressure on that wall as well, because everyone's kind of in a line waiting for you to go up. And you can just feel the eyes behind you, watching and judging as you make your way up the wall. And that was just, a very difficult peak. It's pretty much vertical the whole way up. But all of the 8,000 meter peaks are difficult in their own way. You got Annapurna, which has 35% death rate. Wow. So you're sitting at a base camp with maybe 10 people in your tent and you're thinking, okay, which 3 of us are not making it back after this expedition? Wow. So that's a really intense one. And that's just purely because of avalanche risk. Right. So there are some sections on there where you cross from sort of in a couloir and there's avalanches every 10 minutes. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're gone. Yeah. It's just, yeah. I guess... Everest now, there's been a lot of talk around Everest and how it's becoming more commercialized, and there are a lot more people taking on Everest than there ever have been. Is that true of the other mountains, or do you quite often when you're taking on these challenges find yourself, like you say, one of many that are taking on the same challenge? Yeah, so the industry has changed. When I first started this project in 2021, when I summited Everest. There was a handful of women doing the 14 peaks, and now it's just exploded. And it's a combination of the documentaries that you see on Netflix, like NIMS, and social media, putting it out there. And also how the world is changing and that everyone wants challenges nowadays. You know, a marathon 20 years ago used to be a huge thing. You know, you'd see someone, oh, I've just completed a marathon, and be like, wow, how did you train for that? But now you do a marathon and it's like, okay.
Well, now you get people doing back-to-back marathons.
Yeah,
I'm going to do a
exactly.
marathon every day for a week. Yeah, like you say, certainly the degree to which people challenge themselves now seems to have gone through the roof.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's exploded, which is a great thing. It's great that people are pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. But yeah, in the 8,000 meter peak world, it comes with positives and negatives, like the incident on Everest a few years ago where there was the photo of the queue. I mean, this was a bottleneck section, so there was always going to be a queue there. Taking the photo just kind of put that out into the media. But these queues are very dangerous. And they're happening more and more on the mountains. And
why are they so dangerous?
Because at that altitude, especially that photo, you're in the death zone. So you're relying on oxygen, which is slowly running out. You haven't got an end of supply. And then it's cold as well. So the moment that you stop moving, you start to get cold. And this is a big problem. And your organs start to shut down. And also you lose motivation when you're stuck at one place for so long. And so it's a recipe for disaster to be stuck in one point at that altitude in those temperatures. It could be like minus 30 degrees up there. And so that's why these queues are they're not great at altitude. And we definitely try to avoid them. And there's some 8,000 meter peaks where you don't get these queues. Annapurna, for example, you maybe get 20 people climb per year, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so you've got the mountain to yourself pretty much, which is so beautiful. And definitely something that I'm kind of trying to put myself towards is going to mountains where there are less people, maybe more alpine style rather than the more commercial routes.
I think as well, from a tourist perspective, that's the perception that you have of being there, don't you? That obviously the mountains are incredible and awe-inspiring in themselves, but you've a sense of as a tourist that you're going to go there and you're going to find a degree of isolation. It must be quite surprising for a lot of people to turn up there and just see swarms of people doing exactly the same thing. In terms of, as well as the challenges that you've undertaken, you do a lot of guiding as well, so leading expeditions and people who are looking to achieve their own sort of personal ambitions. What is the typical makeup of the people on those expeditions? Is it, largely retirees who, finished work and are looking for the next big challenges? We were talking there about how the challenges that people undertake these days are a lot more significant than they were previously. Is it driven by the younger generation? Who do you typically find on Everest or any of the other mountains that we mentioned?
On Everest, it is typically people with time and money. Those are the two big factors. And usually those people are probably 50 plus. So people who have finished work and are looking to try something new, to train for something and to achieve something big that maybe up until now they haven't really done. And so that's the general sort of audience that you get at Everest. And then you have the other side, which is the young people who are starting to get sponsorships, who are making it big in social media and have a big following. And these are also the kind of people that come to the 8,000 meter peaks, which is quite refreshing to see as well. And these people are really driven. They're really, really hungry to get those 8,000 meter peaks under their belt, mostly for the sponsors. But yeah, there's two extremes.
How much of that do you think as well is a reaction to people's perception of your generation? I mean, there are a lot of misconceptions around the younger generation. I mean, I think as well there always has been over time, whether it's people pointing fingers at the generation before, millennials, Gen X, saying that people don't work as hard or aren't as driven as they were in my day. How much of that do you think influences people like you and people that take on these challenges to turn around and say, actually, we're not like that. We're just as ambitious and we're just as driven?
Yeah, I think, as you said, there's always going to be perceptions about every generation. And it's something, for me personally, I've sort of blocked out because I've known since a young age that I've always been driven and I've always been motivated. And so when I do the 8,000 meter peaks, I do it with those same skills and those same strengths and those same mindset as I've done since I was 8 years old. And so I've never been perceived as someone who hasn't got a drive or been lazy, for example, or wants to do something quickly, wants results quickly. I've never been perceived like that. So for me, it's never been a problem. But I can imagine how it has been for other people. And I think it's really difficult because it's a totally different time in the world. Things are being done online more than ever. And this does create results quickly. And so it's just a different mindset that we have in the world at the moment. And I think we are still driven and we are still motivated and we do have a drive to achieve things and make a difference in the world. And making a difference is also a big thing. People are very passionate about what they do nowadays. They want to publicize about it. They want to tell the world about it. And we're very conscious about things like sustainability, climate change, equality in the workplace. And these are things that maybe 10, 15 years ago, we didn't see so much. So there are positives to our generation, I definitely think, definitely more than negatives.
And like we were saying earlier, sometimes that ambition and that drive and that energy just needs to be pointed in the right direction and given the right frame in which to achieve.
Definitely.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about obviously your you writing a letter to yourself at the age of 8. What was the starting point for you? I think I read somewhere that at quite a young age you completed the 3 Peaks Challenge. Is that right?
Yeah.
So was that sort of your journey into mountaineering, or is your dad quite into mountaineering? What's sort of been what do you think lit that fire for you?
So my dad was the one that kind of planted that seed in my mind. So for him, mountaineering was a hobby when I was young. So he did Aconcagua in South America. So it's the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas. And for me, he was like God when he completed that. When he got home, my jaw was on the floor. And I would go to my school and I'd tell all my friends, my dad just completed this mountain. And they'd be like, what? What are you talking about? Is that a new Barbie? Or like, I was just in a whole different level when it came to mountaineering. And then, as I said, it was an obsession for me. And so, yeah, my dad was the one that instilled that. And he instilled both the want to go and climb mountains, but also the drive that I needed to complete those mountains. And so we decided together to complete the 3 Peaks Challenge, which is the highest mountain in England, Scotland, and Wales. And this was going to be my first test, kind of dipping my toes into the world of mountaineering and climbing. And so we set off for this challenge. The first time we did it, we completed Snowdon and Scaffold Pike successfully. And then we got to Ben Nevis, which was the highest of the 3. And it was sort of middle of the night at this point. And we got about 200 meters from the summit. And I remember seeing the summit. It was quite close, within distance, reaching distance. But I was just shaking uncontrollably. And then people were walking past me and they were putting jackets on me, layering me up, trying to stop me from shaking. And my dad, he brought a thermometer with him because I'd been sick the week before. And he took my temperature and it read 34 degrees, which is like borderline hypothermic. And he didn't tell me this, so he kind of hid it from me so not to worry me. But I knew that something was wrong. But I also knew that I wanted to finish the challenge because I was on time. I was going to make the record. I was going to be the youngest. And up until then, it had been a lot of hard work as well, like constantly going for 20 hours. But then he turned me around and we sat on a rock and he asked me, he's like, Adri, you can make one of 2 choices right now. Either you can go for that summit and finish your challenge and you'll be the youngest to do it, or you can turn back and go home and get to the car and probably to hospital. And I sort of looked and I thought a little bit in my head and I said, you know what, Daddy, I want to go back down. I want to get to safety. And so I sacrificed a challenge. And for a 9-year-old to make that decision, to forfeit a summit was huge.
Yeah.
And that was the moment my dad said, that was when you found your mountaineering mindset, which was so important.
Yeah.
And it's so important until this day on the mountains, because if I see a summit and I'm hallucinating, if I'm climbing without oxygen or I get some frostbite or something goes terribly wrong, I'm not going to be starstruck by, getting and finishing that challenge and reaching the top. which is called summit fever. But I know that I'll always make the right decisions and always come back to safety, because at the end of the day, the mountains are always there. But
it must be in that moment. It must be an incredibly difficult decision to make, because, like you say, you've at that point you've put in months of training. You've got to balance that sense of being driven and determined with your own safety, and juggling that up in your head and thinking to yourself, am I just taking it easy on myself, or do I really need to turn back here, or am I putting myself in danger? And making that decision, like you say, when you're over 8,000 meters, probably very low on oxygen, not thinking clearly, must be incredibly difficult to do. And like you say, having that experience in your childhood must have come in incredibly good, useful as a reference point to you when you were taking on much more dangerous challenges as an adult.
Yeah, definitely. It's a skill that I've brought with me. And actually, one example, on Dhaulagiri, the sixth highest mountain in the world, it's in Nepal. We had a pretty bad time. Probably one of the most dangerous expeditions I've been on. And actually, I'm quite lucky to still be here today after what happened on Dhaulagiri. And the first incident that happened was that we reached Camp 2, and I was in a team with NIMS and 4 other people, so a very small team. But there was a reason for that, which was everyone else on the mountain had left. So they'd completely abandoned the peak because they knew that a huge storm was coming in a couple of days. And our team chose to ignore that for some reason. And we decided to make a move from Camp 2 all the way to the summit in the nighttime. And that night, the storm hit. And it was a case of 0 kilometers per hour wind in 30 minutes, 100 to 120 kilometers per hour wind. And we were stuck right in the middle of this mountain. Both Camp 2 and Camp 3 were totally out of sight, at least 2 hours each way. And I just remember when that storm hit, I had my hand stuck on my Juma, and it was so strong. And the Juma is sort of the ascending device that you use, and it's almost like a safety, but it also helps you get up the mountain. So you attach it to the rope and you almost pull yourself up. So it kind of relieves some of the weight that you carry. But I had my hand stuck in the Juma, trying to battle with the wind, which was like blowing me off the mountain at this point. And we were all screaming at each other, but the sound was just blown away instantly. And Nims was in front of me, and he turned around and, he screamed at my face, like, "Adriana, you have to move now." And I just, I froze and I looked at him and I was like, what is actually happening right now? I'm about to die. We're all about to die. And I tried to get my hand out of the Juma and it was stuck. It was completely frozen solid to the Juma. And I realized I had frost nip on all of my fingers. And so I took my gloves off immediately and I put it under Nims's armpits to warm them up. And the sensation started coming back, and the pain in your nerves is just like so excruciating. It was absolutely awful. And we knew we had to get back down somehow to Camp 2 to safety, and also try and save my fingers. And I think half an hour more out in that storm, I would have lost all of them. But luckily we got back down. And there's a video of me online as well on this mountain, coming back down from the storm and clapping my hands every 2 or 3 steps to try and get the blood circulation coming through. And I mean, it was like touching a rock, completely solid. And we got back to Camp 2, and then I put my hands in warm water and warmed them up. And I mean, I damaged all the fingers. I mean, till now, they're still damaged, but I saved them, thankfully. And then after that, we decided to continue our expedition. But at this point, we'd been at Camp 2 resting for 5 days, trying to recover from the storm, but also waiting for the weather to clear up. And we went for a summit push, which was fine. The sky was beautiful, clear, no wind. But at the summit, the next incident happened. And I started to feel faint, and I felt the corners of my eyes sort of blackening. And, I didn't really know where I was. I was just not hallucinating, but my mind was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this isn't normal. And we were the only 2 left on the summit, myself and my Sherpa, and everyone else had gone down already, because we were taking some photos for sponsors. And I asked my Sherpa, I was like, what is wrong? Can you check my oxygen? And he checked the oxygen. He's like, Adri, it's 0. And I was like, okay, do you have any extra oxygen? And he checked his as well. I was like, 0. And I was like, what have you done? this is my third 8,000 meter peak, so I didn't have the experience to know how much oxygen I needed for my summit push, which was definitely my fault. But I went into panic mode and I started screaming, and I told him, can you please take the radio and call the rest of the team and tell them to leave oxygen there on the way down, because at least we have half a chance. And he sort of searched his bag, and I could see his face was just, white. And he's like, I don't have the radio. And I was like, that is the worst mistake that you can make on a mountain. And I had no energy left to scream or shout. And actually, I lied on the floor. And, in my head, I was thinking, this is it. I'm dead now. There's nothing else I can do. We're at 8,200 meters altitude, no one else in sight, no radio, nothing. And my InReach tracker, so my tracking device that my parents can track me on, had died also, because we'd been 5 days at Camp 2 with no power. And so, I was just laying there in the snow, and my Sherpa shook me very hard. And he said, you know what, Adri, okay, we need to get back down. We need to do this. I was like, okay, today is not the day that we're going to die. And so we short roped to each other about 1 meter, and we made our way down. And it took 36 hours to get back down to base camp to safety, and 0 oxygen along the way. And actually, we found the radio next to Camp 2 in the snow. I was just looking at that radio, and I was like, that could have killed me.
Yeah.
So Dhaulagiri was next level.
Wow. How do you then, having experienced that and the fear of that moment, how do you then come back from that? How do you then say, right, the following day or the following week, right, we're going to go back and we're going to try again?
For me, that experience was almost like worst case scenario that could happen on an 8,000 meter peak. And I knew that was a lesson for me. And so I went home after that 8,000 meter peak, and I sat down and I worked with one of my partners, Gazing. And what they do is they talk you through how to deal with pressure and how to work in a blue state of mind, so like a calm state of mind under those pressured situations, which is the opposite of what I did on Dhaulagiri. I totally freaked out on that summit. And so I sat down and I wrote down everything that could go wrong on an 8,000 meter peak and how I'm going to react to it. And I made it almost like muscle memory. And so now it's a ritual for me. Before every single expedition, I'll write down anything that's out of my control, essentially. And it could be anything from people gossiping about you at base camp up till avalanche or your partner falls or, extreme situations. And so that really helped me, and also gave me confidence to go back to the peak and know what to do when this happens or if this happened again.
I guess, like you say, having a process in that moment to work through so you don't just lose your mind and panic is incredibly important. And I can't imagine being in a situation like that. What do you think you've learned about yourself over the course of the challenges that you've undertaken?
I think I've learned that my mental drive is what's got me through all of this. And that without that, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I got that from my parents, which I'm incredibly lucky to have had. And my father especially taught me that, you have to work hard to be able to achieve these goals. And my mother also instilled that in me from a very young age. So for me, it was that, just having that mental strength and drive and using it to the maximum. Just sitting at home every day, and if I have spare time, okay, I'm going to watch a documentary about mountaineering, or I'm going to learn a new rope skill, or, I didn't want to lose any second of any day, especially before Everest. That was my mission, was to summit that mountain and be able to run a marathon when I summited. I wanted to be the best of the best. And so, that I learned that I have a very strong mindset, and I need to use it.
That was the first mountain, or first of the 8,000 meter plus mountains that you summited. What level of preparation and training is required to do something like that?
It's a combination of mental, physical, and spiritual. And when you put those three together and you get those to 100%, then you're ready to climb Everest. And the mental side of it is going through worst case scenarios, making sure that you can work for long periods of time in very boring situations, because mountaineering at that altitude is quite boring. You're just one foot in front of the other, and it's just yourself and the snow, and that's it, you know? So it's monotonous. So getting used to that. And then the physical side of it is obviously like cardiovascular training, going to the gym, running up and down hills, trail running, swimming. These are all part of the physical side of things. And then there's a spiritual side, which is believing in yourself, but also having a bigger purpose. Those are the two parts of spirituality. And yeah, the combination of those three will get you to where you need to be.
Excellent. And obviously, like you say, or like we said earlier, when you took on Everest, you were at the age of 20.
Yeah.
So you must have begun the preparation for that in your teenage years. How were your teenage years, or how was your childhood different, perhaps from some of your friends, in terms of the things that you had to sacrifice, or the amount of training that you had to do to achieve what you wanted?
I think sacrifice is the key word for my childhood. So from the age of about 15, I really began to seriously think about mountaineering. And I started training really hard for Everest. And we decided to do the 7 Summits Challenge together. That was one of the big things with my father and I. And we did 3 of the peaks. Those were Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, and Elbrus. And these were all in preparation for the highest mountain in the world. And during these peaks, I was between the age of 15 and 18. And this time is quite crucial in a teenager's life. But during Mount Elbrus, I missed my school prom, which for me was a big deal, and for many teenagers. Then during Kilimanjaro, I was actually studying for my GCSE exams. So it was a week holiday that we had between exams. And I remember revising for my maths exam at 5,000 meters, which is not normal. But it seemed that the altitude helped quite a bit.
Did you pass your maths exam?
I did, yeah,
well,
I did.
You go.
And then for Aconcagua, I actually summited my 18th birthday on the summit. When most people at 18 years old are probably exploring the London nightlife, I was standing at the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas. So for me, it was all about sacrifice, and those were big things. But there are also smaller things, less superficial, like losing friendships and not having time to meet my friends, which happens up till now. I come back to London for a few days and I don't have time to meet other people, or I'm always on the mountains, I'm not in contact, and you lose people along the way, which has been difficult. But it's all part of being a mountaineer and wanting to achieve a goal. And
how in terms of, people who are listening to this and watching this may have, for example, have climbed Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is quite a popular destination now, and quite a lot of people have done that. How does that compare with climbing Everest in terms of the level of difficulty, the level of expertise, the mindset that's required to do that?
The difference isn't so big. Everest has an element of obviously the altitude, which genetically either you have it or you don't. There's nothing you can do to change that. You can't train more to get your altitude adaptation to be better. That doesn't work. But actually the whole system of climbing Kilimanjaro is a multi-day expedition. You have your summit push that you start in the evening. And it's the same with Everest. It's multiple days. It's a longer expedition. It's 2 months compared to Kilimanjaro, which might be 8 days. But it's the same process. And it's the same mental strength that you need for both of them. And I always say that mountaineering is 70% mental and 30% physical. If you don't have it up here, then you're not going to make it. And so I always say, mountains are all similar in that way. And so someone who's climbed Kilimanjaro, to be able to climb Everest, they need to work on techniques and skills, and just their drive and their motivation, and they can do it.
Excellent. As well as the incredible things that you've achieved in terms of the mountains that you've summited. In that 4-year time, you've also started your own business as well. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so Gerge and I, we started a company called AGA Adventures, and it's also in honor of our friend who passed away, Ashok, hence the name AGA. And we decided that we wanted to create this company for two reasons. The first one, because we love mountains and adventure. And so we wanted to start a job in something that we love. And instead of spending money all the time on the mountains, I wanted to start making some. So that's why we started the company for the first part. And then the second reason was that we wanted to create something that puts safety at number one. And you'd think, okay, that's, every company would be like that, right? But it's the total opposite. And it seems that nowadays companies are taking more and more inexperienced climbers to mountains like Everest or other 8,000 meter peaks. They reach the base camp. They don't even know what a harness is or a crampon, never even seen a mountain up close. And these are the people that are putting everyone else's life in danger on the mountains. And we really want to take a few steps back and go back to when, like 20 years ago, when people had to have a CV and they said, okay, I've climbed this 6,000 meter peak, this 7,000 meter peak. Am I ready for Everest? Tick, go on, you can do it. And so that's our main mission. And we're just so focused on that. It's so important. I mean, the Sherpas are risking their lives to support, people like us to climb Mount Everest. And, the least that we can do is bring them clients that at least have half a chance of surviving the mountain, if they were left on their own. If your Sherpa falls or if your Sherpa's sick or something, you need to know exactly how to save yourself. And most people don't.
Yeah.
So for us, that's so important. That's why we made this company.
Excellent. I guess coming back to a point that we touched upon earlier, when it comes to Generation Z, I will call them Generation Z, not Generation Z. Look, as we touched upon earlier, there's a perception that people of that generation maybe don't work as hard. I think it was Jodie Foster earlier this year said that she found people from that generation incredibly annoying to work with. What do you think are some of the misconceptions around that generation, and to what degree do you think they are fair?
Misconceptions. I think Generation Z, people think that this generation are not willing to work as hard for what they get. And it's all about instant gratification, instant likes, everything instant to make people happy in the moment. And this translates into the workplace sometimes. If they get a piece of work and they find it, a bit too long, a bit too boring, maybe they'll brush it aside and move on to the next thing. And it's a combination of technology and also social media coming into play where just everything is so in the moment, and if you don't like something, you can swipe it away and move on to the next. And people's attention span is getting smaller and smaller and smaller by the years. And I think it's reflected negatively into this generation. And I think parts of it are true. But then
I think as well, though, parts of it are just being a young person.
Well, exactly, yeah.
I think back to myself when I was sort of in my early 20s starting to work. I wasn't particularly driven by work. I was driven, by socializing with my friends and seeing people at the weekend, and work was something that enabled me to do that. But work wasn't something in itself that I took particularly seriously. And I think that's just being a young person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to give people a chance to adapt to a new way of life. It's 2024 now. Every year we're changing and we've got to adapt. As I said, adapting is key. And I think everyone needs to accept how we work with each other, and young people are going to work differently to people who are a few years older. And I think there are a lot of positives to this generation, as I said before. And we're very passionate about what we do. We like to make sure we do everything perfectly. And we also like to get feedback from others. I think that's very important, to have someone sit and tell you, yeah, you're doing this right and you're doing this well. And you can go even further, which is what Nim said to me. He said, you are made to do this, but you should go to the next level.
I think as well, like going back to that point as well, that the point that you made earlier around, the role that social media plays, and people now have short attention spans, are probably more distracted than they've ever been. That's also true of the older generation. And going back to that point you made about mentorship and management and having someone that pays attention to you and takes into account, you're new to the workforce or you're new to a particular experience and you may need to be pushed in the right direction, or you may need to be shown how to do your job in the right way, it's just as important for the older generations to make time for that and to commit time to that, and not just assume that people coming into the workforce are going to be able to pick that up naturally, especially when you think about the way that work has changed in the last few years. Remote work is a lot more prevalent. There's a lot less face-to-face time. The role of the manager in terms of helping younger people settle into the workforce is critically important.
Definitely. Yeah, I think this sort of lack of face-to-face interaction, it's not the best. And I think people always need to sit one in front of each other and see emotions, see body language, be able to communicate. Communication is so key, and I think we're losing that a little bit with the staying at home and working remotely.
But even on Zoom calls as well, it's not the same as being in a room with someone. Certainly when it comes to working and just being around them while they do a particular job.
Yeah, but I think what Gen Z does is they really work remotely well, and they know how to do it because they've been brought up in this situation. And I think we can learn a lot from Gen Z in terms of how to communicate online, how to work online, and how to present, which is very different. Presenting online is vastly different to presenting to a huge audience or a group of people. So I think we can really take some positives from that.
What do you think are some of the unique attributes that your generation will bring to the workforce?
I think we're very creative as people. And I think that creative spark is going to be so important in the future. And I also think we're very interested and involved in sustainability and improving these within the workplace and equality. And I think this is just going to get more and more important as the years go by. And I think these are very important qualities that Gen Z are bringing into the world and will carry on bringing.
Excellent. So, Adriana, thank you so much for being here today. I should have pointed out before we started, Adriana actually flew in from Kathmandu on a couple of days ago. As soon as this podcast finishes, she's flying back to Kathmandu because next week you start the final of the 14 mountain challenge. So when is that? Thursday next week you begin that?
Yeah, April 11th, I will drive to the border of Tibet and begin my last 8,000-meter peak, Shisha Pangma.
And how does that compare with other mountains? Why have you left that till last?
Actually, getting the permit and the visas to climb in Tibet is really difficult. And so they only let a small amount of people in each year. And actually, they were closed from many years, from 2017 all the way to 2020, I think. They've been closed to climbers. Everest from the Tibet side has always been open, but just Shisha Pangma and Choyu, those two mountains are very difficult. But we've finally been given the chance this season to go and climb there, which I'm very grateful for and very excited for as well.
And from a technical point of view, how does it compare to?
Relatively, it's one of the easier 8,000-meter peaks. It's actually the lowest of all of them, so it's just above 8,000 meters. So that brings a little bit of confidence, but always you never know what's going to happen on the mountains. So many things are out of your control, and there's so many risks out there. So we treat each mountain with respect and on the same level.
Wishing you all the luck in the world. Not that I think that you'll need it. I think your story is absolutely incredible and hugely inspiring. So thank you so much for flying thousands of miles around the world to be here today. In terms of people that might want to follow your progress or that might want to find out more about your company, where can they go to find out that?
So mostly social media, Instagram. My handle is adri.brownlee, or they can go to our AJ Adventures website. Just search on Google and it should come up.
Perfect. And if they're interested in climbing Everest themselves, they should get in touch with you.
Yep.
Certainly if safety.
If they're prepared, yes.
Only if they're prepared. Brilliant. Perfect. Well, that's all we have time for today. If you are interested in listening to more Workday podcasts, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, and SoundCloud. And you can also read more on the Workday blog. Thank you very much and have a great Workday.